Hello and welcome to the Mystery of Shortlisting. Today we have Sophie Chadwick and Toby Lucas-Smith, who I'm going to be interviewing, and students and recent graduates are very welcome to answer questions. If we start straight away, Sophie and Toby, can you tell us your job titles and what that means a typical day looks like for you?
I'll go first. Okay, so my job title is Director of Enterprise and Employability. A typical day, I mean, at the moment, mostly after I've done my morning walk, sitting in front of a laptop, dealing with a whole range of things. This morning, I've just been working on a request for extra resources. I've got the shortlisting event today. I mean, there is really no typical day, except the one thing that is typical is that I will always get lots of emails.
Fantastic. I'm sorry about that if that was some of those ones. And Toby, if you don't mind asking the same, please.
And so I'm the branch manager at Unitemps. Again, a typical day can be pretty. Think about it in terms of our function and what it is that we provide. Obviously, we're the university's in-house recruitment agency, so when it comes to, it can be part of managing the business as a whole, but also it can be recruiting for a number of different vacancies. So that can be either internal opportunities at the university, all the temporary jobs which lots of our lovely students work on for us, or engaging with sort of local external businesses as well, again to try and find sort of suitable job opportunities for our students and graduates.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask a couple of more questions and you can both fight it out between yourselves as to who answers or who answers in what order. So the next one is, what is the process of shortlisting? Where would you say that starts and ends, or can you give us a bit more information on that?
Go on, Toby, you go first this time.
Okay, well, I think in regards to shortlisting, obviously, the moment that you receive an application for a job vacancy, essentially you're going through the shortlisting process. Obviously, people put a lot of time and effort into writing sort of job specifications and making it clear what the responsibilities of the role are and what it is that they want to see in an application. So when it comes to the shortlisting process, literally as soon as you've sent that application through, you know, the CV, the cover letter, whatever the process might kind of be, it literally starts from right there. And it is so crucial to make sure that your application is providing everything that they want to see, that they've laid out in the job spec, if you want to make it through that shortlisting process and find yourself in an interview situation.
Fantastic, thank you. Any more to add, Sophie?
Probably not so much in when, but I guess I'd like to talk a bit more about how the process works from the recruiter's perspective. So I don't know if you want me to cover that now or to hold off, because for me that's probably the most important bit.
Do you want to fire away with that bit now?
Okay, so I guess, I mean, first of all, I've been doing recruitment and shortlisting about 25 years, so I must have filled 100 posts in that time in various different organisations and jobs. So I've done a lot of shortlisting, and so I can tell you what works from a recruiter's perspective and what doesn't work. And probably number one is answer the exam question. So it's a, you know, in some ways it's quite a scientific process, shortlisting. You're literally looking at the person you want and you've set that out in the person specification and the job description, and you're looking for somebody whose experience and knowledge and qualifications tells you that they're worth interviewing. So probably my number one tip would be answer the exam question. Number two would be keep your application concise. I've had applications come through that run on to 15 pages, and if I've had 30 applications, that is just too much reading time. You know, most managers that are recruiting are really busy. They haven't got time to read through pages and pages of what is often quite sort of waffly information and not 100% relevant. So keep it concise and keep it relevant, and make sure you've got no spelling mistakes and grammar, but I'll probably come on to that at some point later.
I think you've answered questions 7, 8 and 9 there, I think. I've noticed we've got one question come in on the Menti already, so I'd love to fire that off to both of you and for your opinions. The question is, what are good questions to ask employers at the end of an interview, and what questions shouldn't you ask employers at the end of an interview?
I mean, I'm happy to kick off with that one. So what you probably shouldn't ask at the end of an interview is anything to do with money. Generally, at that moment in time, you know, they've set out what their sort of financial offer is, I suppose, and obviously you put an application in, and by speaking about money at that moment in time, you tend to be jumping the gun. Obviously that's a subsequent conversation to have if you are in a position where you're offered that opportunity. So I'd say don't talk about money at that stage. In terms of what questions you might ask, I suppose it's really about thinking, you know, how you kind of see yourself in that role, in that business. It's really, really dependent on, you know, what the organisation is, the longevity of the role. You know, sometimes if you're a student at university, for example, if you get a job in sort of the hospitality sector, although it might be a bit challenging at the moment, but obviously generally there's lots of opportunities like that in Canterbury, and you're probably just thinking, right, okay, I want to get this job, get some income, get some experience, fantastic. And when it comes to being a graduate, you might want to focus more on what opportunities are there in the future within this organisation? What are my aspirations? What is it that I want to achieve? And ask questions around that you know, the things that you want to know sort of longer term, perhaps about sort of the team culture in the organisation. You can find out a little bit more about, you know, how it kind of aligns to your core values and stuff like that as well. But again, it's about making sure that sort of poignant questions that are really relevant, and yeah, aren't going to be sort of too direct or sort of potentially offensive or make it look like you haven't done your homework with money or something like that, really.
Yeah, I think I mean, what I would add to that, because the thing at the end of the interview, I think the most important thing is try not to make it look as if they're standard questions that you're asking because you feel like you ought to ask them. I think probably the most important thing is to be really genuine in your questions, that the questions you ask show that you're genuinely interested in the job, the company that you're working for, and that it shows that you've really thought about the job itself. So I think I can't really give you a standard question to ask, because in a way that would be missing the point. It's more about you using it as an opportunity to demonstrate that you are genuinely interested in the job and the company.
And actually, I've just had another thought, if I can just tack on as well. I would always say, often, you know, when you're in an interview, obviously it's a high pressure situation and you might feel like you've missed something or you haven't answered a question particularly well. It can actually be a really good opportunity to say, look, is there anything that you've asked me today that I haven't really covered or that you'd like more detail on? Because it gives you another opportunity to sort of showcase your skills and experience, where you're worried that you might have kind of rushed through or missed something or not given them what it is that they want to see in that interview.
Yeah, can I just add to that, which is that if you're confident enough, you can also ask, at this point in the interview, do you have any? I'm not quite sure how I would phrase it, but is there anything that I haven't covered sufficiently? I'm not sure I'm articulating myself very well with this one, but you can use it as an opportunity to make sure that you're not leaving the room where the interviewers have got some doubts. I haven't seen this done very often, but I have seen it done a couple of times, and it's provided a really good opportunity to revisit something that maybe you weren't clear about earlier on in the interview.
Fantastic, thanks both. The other question it's always good to ask is when you might find out the result of the interview. That can be a really handy one to know the answer to if they haven't already said it. The other thing I was going to mention is that we do actually have a blog on this that I wrote just last week on preparing for an interview. So it's a beautiful segue. Thank you to whoever asked that question.
Sorry, Susanna, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, I will, just so that everyone knows, I will send you an email after this session and it'll have a link to the blog and a whole range of other resources. Sorry, Sophie, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of what Toby said at the start about things not to ask, I would say anything to do with benefits, so not just salary, but things like annual leave and working hours. They're just things that you can discuss afterwards, and it sort of creates the impression that you've got the job if you're asking about those sort of things in the interview, and it just doesn't leave a very good impression with the interviewer.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point, that there is post offer of a role, there's then kind of that unknown, awkward negotiation stage. Yeah. And at that point, that might be a really good place to bring up any of those concerns, but to avoid that in the interview is a really good idea. Wait until you've got the job before you're making those negotiations. Sophie, you've already answered. I'm just going to pose it to Toby. What are your top tips for shortlisting? When we're specifically considering that today's workshop is called the Mystery of Shortlisting, if you have any top tips on understanding the mystery as well as just generally in shortlisting.
I think, building on what Sophie said previously, I think what's really, really important, which people often don't do, is making sure that the language that they're using within that job specification, that you're using that language back to them, because it shows that, you know, you understand what it is that they're asking for, that you understand the language, especially if the role's sort of got any technical software or anything like that which needs to be used. So I think by sort of threading that into your application and back through, you know, that enables the recruiter to kind of pick out those keywords and see that you're a good match for a job. It's really important to remember when you actually make a job application, it might not be seen by a human first. So lots of businesses now, they will have sort of different artificial intelligence software, which is going through those applications and filtering out certain things that it will then either make a sort of suggestion from in terms of, you know, if a CV is going to be relevant for the job, or it might bring those, you know, those sort of skills or those keywords or whatever it is to the attention of a recruiter that's looking at it. And additionally, you know, I used to recruit for the automotive and aerospace industries. I did that for 2.5 years, a few years ago now. I used to employ all sorts of people, from project managers to stress analysis engineers, which, you know, on an aircraft, make sure that the wing isn't going to snap in half. And we all know, you know, that wouldn't be very good. To designing engines, gearboxes, whatever it might be, all sorts of really skilled roles in those particular industries. I am no industry expert in that area. I learned a lot of skills. I developed a lot of knowledge. So I was able to pick out certain things and was aware of different software packages which were available. So I did, you know, I built expertise, but I wasn't capable at a real technical level of going in and doing that job or something. So you've always got to remember as well, the recruiter that's looking through that application might not have the expertise. So that's why using the correct language, which is sort of peppered throughout the job specification, and really showing that you've kind of grasped what it is that they're looking for and how you're able to demonstrate that you've got that, that's really, really important.
Fantastic, thank you. While we've been talking, we've got 2 more questions come through, one in the chat and one on Menti. So we'll go to the chat one first. We have been asked, I've been offered a job and will be starting next week, but I've also been given a second stage job interview for a company where diversity and inclusion are at the forefront of the company, and I'm very passionate about this. What advice would you give me, please?
Oh, well, good question. I mean, first of all, you obviously are good at being shortlisted because you've already been offered a job and you're starting next week. So yeah, congratulations. I mean, this is a difficult one, and it's the old sort of bus analogy. You know, you wait for ages and then 2 come at once. I think my advice would be, you know, you have to think about, you know, what do you really want? And I think, you know, if you've put in multiple applications, sometimes it does happen that, you know, you get offered one and then you've either just started or you're about to start, and then you get an interview for another one. I think if you really want this other job as well, then I would continue to progress that. You know, you've got to put yourself first. If it's a job you really want, then definitely go for it 100%. And sometimes it does happen that you've got to let another company down, but I would say go for it 100%. But obviously don't tell the company that you're doing that. Toby, how about you?
I mean, yeah, I'd agree. I'd say completely put yourself first in that situation. The key thing to do is just to make sure, you know, if you're in the fortunate position where you are offered that second job, it's just about maintaining a level of professionality at the whole time. So you hear stories of people, and I'm aware of it happening, and somebody gets offered a job and then they get offered a better job, and they're due to start with the first business next week, and they just never turn up. No communication, no nothing. And essentially you burn your bridges with that employer, you burn your bridges with, you know, that person who may go on to work at other organizations as well. So I'd say at the end of the day, if you're offered the second role and you decide that you don't want to continue with the first one, if you respectfully and professionally explain the situation to them and say, you know, something else has come up which is just perfectly aligned to what it is that you're interested in and what it is that you want to do, you know, at the end of the day, businesses understand this situation. So I think as long as you conduct yourself in the professional way, then that's absolutely fine.
That's great. Thank you both very much for fantastic answers, and thank you so much to our question giver on that question. We've got one through on the Mentimeter that says interviewees are often very nervous during interviews and may not give an accurate portrayal of themselves as a result. How do interviewers take this into account during the interview process? Great question.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I think things have changed over the years with regard to nervousness, and I think interviewers are now much more tolerant and make far more allowances for people who are nervous than they would have done sort of 10, 20, 25 years ago. I mean, I think if you are nervous, I mean, obviously there's lots of sort of tips and techniques that can help you. A good interviewer will want to sort of allay your nerves and will want you to be relaxed, because you just don't get the best out of people when they're nervous. I mean, this might be a bit controversial, but in my view, there's nothing wrong with a candidate admitting that they're nervous. Quite often, once they've done that, that then breaks the ice and makes the rest of the interview a bit more relaxing. So personally, I wouldn't be afraid to do that.
Toby?
I think, yeah, you know, there's lots of different interview styles in terms of how different businesses like to sort of test people and see if they're going to be a good fit for their organisation. I'd agree. I think a lot more businesses are sort of focusing on trying to bring out the best of the candidates they're seeing, because at the end of the day, an interview situation, it almost isn't a real situation, and that isn't work day in, day out. So I think everyone expects you to be nervous at the beginning of an interview. If you're not, then there's probably an issue there in itself, because, you know, it'd make you wonder if you're passionate about that job, if you're interested in it, and if you actually want it or not. So, you know, I think it isn't something to worry about. Obviously, by doing as much preparation as possible, that's going to make you feel a little bit less nervous, because you're more comfortable with what it is that you want to say, and those things just come a little bit more fluently then when you know you're sort of preparing answers and thinking about what they might ask you. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. I'm sure you would settle into your rhythm after a few minutes as well. And yeah, you know, nerves are expected.
Definitely. I was doing some interviews a couple of weeks ago, and I was the third interviewer, so I was 3/4 of the way down the questions, and I tried to make each interviewee laugh just a little bit and just break their ice. And we found that their answers on those last couple of questions improved drastically, because they'd been made to feel more relaxed. So but give yourself a little giggle, loosen up a little bit before you go in if you can. Definitely great advice.
Sorry, I'd just like to add, people want to see your personality as well. So, you know, obviously, again, it's about maintaining professionality, but there's nothing wrong with trying to relax a little bit, and you know, a little bit of humour to break the ice and put yourself at ease is really great advice.
Yeah. So if your interviewer uses humour, they're not trying to catch you out, they're trying to help you. Don't assume that they're trying to be mean or anything. So moving on a little bit, let's look at the good, the bad, and the completely embarrassing of shortlisting. Firstly, Toby and Sophie, what are the first things that stand out for you when you're shortlisting? What are the best things that someone can do? What really makes your heart happy when you receive that application and it's
Sophie, I think I know what you're going to say for this one, so I'll let you lead.
Okay, so what makes my heart happy? A concise CV that has no spelling mistakes, that is really professionally laid out, and I don't mean fancy, but just neat and tidy. Font size, make it legible, no rambling. And if you can structure your application, whether it's CV or application form, to be linked very directly to the job advert, the job description, the person spec, look for some of those key words that the employer is looking for and put those in your application. Do it in an artificial way, but if you can mirror the language that they're using to a certain extent, it shows that you're sort of aligning your thinking to the application. And I've got to get this in. Don't have one CV that you fire off to more than one employer. Rather than apply for 100 jobs using the same CV, you're much better off crafting each application carefully and really focusing on maybe 5 to 10 jobs and really tailoring. So yeah, that would be another sort of big tip for me. Go for quality, not quantity.
Okay, and for me then, so firstly, the formatting, for it to look professional, look like a smart document, the format is so important. I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it's the average recruiter spends 7 seconds making a decision on a CV. So ultimately, if they open it and it looks unprofessional, it looks rubbish, even if the content's very good, they probably won't get that far. So it's really, really important to make sure that it's a nice, smart, professional looking document. Beyond that, obviously, Sophie's just said about the importance of tailoring a CV. It's literally the most important thing that you can do. I mean, I've just had a look on the Unitemps website now in terms of vacancies that we've got at Canterbury Christchurch and in sort of local businesses, and there's 11 positions which are being advertised at the moment. If you applied to all of those jobs with exactly the same CV, you'd be lucky to get shortlisted for one of those positions ultimately, because every single position is different and they're going to be looking for different things in the job spec that you want to make sure that you kind of thread into that application. And actually, one thing that is really important and quite a lot of people don't do in my experience is people don't really seem to put much about the fact that they're at Canterbury Christchurch University at the moment and what it is about that which sort of makes them a good candidate essentially within their CV. I quite often see that somebody will say their course title or the faculty that they study in or something like that, and it literally doesn't say anything else. And I think it's really important to make sure that you're kind of building in, what are some of the transferable skills that you're developing and able to demonstrate as part of the qualification that's what you're doing. That could be to do with obviously meeting deadlines or submitting dissertations or working in sort of group projects or leading group projects and how that's developed your communication skills. And, there's so much stuff that you can kind of thread in there. And equally just saying, one line about your 3 years at university, it makes it look like you haven't got up to much. So you don't want to overdo it, but you want to make sure you show some transferable skills and just give a bit of an overview of what it is that you've studied really. I remember when I was my first interview out of university actually, so I did an economics degree, and it turned out that one of the interviewers had also done an economics degree, so at the end of the interview we ended up having sort of a 5 to 10 minutes chat about our experience, and it enabled me to build that rapport, build that bond as well, and that ended up being my first graduate job. So it's all these little things that together really do sort of contribute to not only getting you shortlisted, but can sort of help you along the line too.
Great. Vanessa, I can see you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was gonna what Toby said, I completely agree, because for my job interview for the job I just got, I told them that how I worked at a supermarket and I was working at Waitrose, and I started talking about how I got trained on the delicatessen counter, and then I started talking about cheese, and they were just like, oh wow, you know about cheese, and then they were like, you could get some cheese for our Christmas party, and so then we just started to build like a rapport, so it made me feel more comfortable in the interview, and I could just talk about like my achievements and goals. So I agree.
That's fantastic. Fantastic.
That's brilliant. And actually, there must be something about cheese counters, because I had a candidate that got offered a permanent job about 6 weeks ago, and he worked at a shop called McNade's over in Faversham, and he worked on the cheese counter then. And I think at one point they said pretty much all of the examples that he was giving in some way linked back to cheese. But he was able to demonstrate so many different skills and build that rapport up. And yeah, he got offered the job. So yeah, no, that's really good to hear, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add to that, which is that if you look at shortlisting, so shortlisting and interviews are sort of obviously two sort of separate stages in the recruitment process. So when you submit your application, your objective there is purely to get shortlisted. And then once you've been shortlisted, your objective is to convince the interview panel that you are the right person for that job. And always bear in mind that people buy people, and the more you can talk enthusiastically about what you've done and let your personality shine through in a very genuine way, then people will buy into that. And I think, you know, the cheese example is a really good one. And if you know, that the more you've got things to talk about, the more you've got chance of people buying into what you're saying and buying into you as a person, whereas if you haven't got that much to talk about, it's really hard. You're making it difficult for people to buy into you.
Fantastic. I've just got 2 extra bits to add to this. Firstly, I look through all the CVs that come through on our inbox, which I'll explain in a moment. And one of the big things that I see is about skills lists. People, there's a real trend at the moment for just writing a list of key skills like communication, team working, things like that. That time has passed. It's really important that you claim that you evidence it. And my big word for this is weave. So weave in those skills, weave in that information, so that it's like when you're writing an assignment. So for each thing you claim, you've got some evidence or an example. So rather than just saying I'm a good team worker, you could give an example how in a previous role you've shown that great teamwork. The other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to, Sophie and Toby both mentioned CVs and the importance of getting them right, is our CV 360 tool on the Careers and Enterprise Hub. Again, I'll send you an email afterwards with some more information about this. I'd thoroughly recommend you go and use the CV 360 tool. It gives you instant feedback in a few seconds, and it uses an ATS, which is like what auto recruiters use, which sifts through CVs before they get a human check. And you're also welcome to have a human check from us by emailing your CV to careers@canterbury.ac.uk. But I'll pop all that in an email afterwards. So we've talked about the good of shortlisting. Let's go to the bad before we get to the embarrassing. What are your big no-nos? What is it when you see it on an application or a CV that just switches you off immediately?
I mean, for me, it's got to be something that is very long, a very long application. My heart sinks, and I feel obligated to read through it all, because I think particularly when you work for a university or somewhere in the public sector, you know, have a sort of duty to be, you know, very ethical in your recruitment. And so I will always read people's applications from start to finish. But if it's very long, I'll be reading it with quite a heavy heart and not particularly motivated. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's going to be the opposite of everything I said earlier in terms of the good things. So, yeah, just no really long CVs or applications.
And for me, I think when you can see that an application's a bit lazy or a bit rushed in terms of what's been submitted, you know, you can tell basically, because it's likely to be sort of littered with mistakes or just not really answering what it is that's been set out in the job description, the job specification. I think we've kind of, you know, we've talked about the importance of CVs in the shortlisting process, but actually cover letters as well are absolutely integral. And I can say that especially with experience of working at the university. So, you know, for all of the internal positions that we have at the university, whether on a temporary basis or actually for permanent positions as well, for sort of those of us that work here, writing a good tailored cover letter is so important. Obviously in your CV you kind of, you know, you answer the core areas, I suppose, but a cover letter is an opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into some of those, some of those areas, and really give sort of a working example of how it is that you tick those boxes. And you might think on some occasions, well, I don't have any particular experience in this area. But again, that's where you've got an opportunity to weave, to use Susanna's word, to sort of weave in some of your university experiences or other experiences that you might have into that application. Or if you really don't have any experience to draw upon for that particular area, it's an opportunity to say, OK, but in that situation, this is how I would go about it. This is the methodology or the logic that I would use to enable me to, achieve in this area, or to succeed, or to demonstrate that I've got this skill set, or that I would know how to deal with it, even if I haven't done it, previously. So hopefully in a sort of long-winded way, that kind of answers.
I think also just talk about cover letters. They are an opportunity to maybe address things that you weren't able to as part of the application form or the CV. So it's a chance to really set out your motivation for applying for the job. And also, if you're applying for something and you think, actually, I'm not sure that on the face of it, I've got the relevant experience, and you think that maybe your application and CV doesn't quite sell you in the best possible light, the cover letter is an opportunity to really put your own stamp on it and say, why you really want the job and why you think you'd be great. So yeah, I think make it really personal. Try and get your personality to shine through in that cover letter. But yeah, I think cover letters are definitely really important. And just one thing in terms of the bad, I have seen some applications where you're given an area of tech, an area that size, and people will just put like one small sentence. I mean, the size of the box isn't hugely important, but if you are only filling 10% of each box, it just looks like you can't be bothered and you're not interested. So try and fill each box. It just looks more professional and more complete.
Great, thank you both very much. So we've done the good of shortlisting, we've done the bad of shortlisting. Before we get to the embarrassing of shortlisting, which I'll give you another moment to think about, we have another question through on the Menti, which I'd love to pose to you. It says, in creative industries, applicants will often add a design element or illustration to their CV. Would you look at a CV that breaks the norms? And at what point would a creative decision go too far?
I think with jobs for the creative industry, it is a little bit different. I think you still want to have something which looks similar in the format of a CV, but I'm very aware that then you might have links to various things that you've produced online. It may be that certain job roles as well, again, for a sort of creative position, if they're asking for experience in a particular software, they might want to see a portfolio. So I'd say, always make sure that you've got a link to a portfolio or something like that you can offer as well, because I think with those creative type roles, often sort of actions speak louder than words, really, in terms of what it is that you're able to produce and what it is that you've done before. In terms of, you hear about all sorts of different creative ways that people have sort of put in job applications, and Susanna might be able to share a couple of links when she sends out that email later, some really sort of cool out the box ways that people have thought to sort of promote themselves and what it is that they can do. So I think you've got to judge it based on the particular role in the particular company as to what you think is sort of appropriate measures to apply to. I'm struggling to think of something which would be sort of going too far as such, but I'm sure there's plenty of things as well which would be a don't do, which perhaps Sophie or Susanna can suggest.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one. I think the context is really important. So and Toby used the word judgment. If it's a really innovative new startup and it's very obviously got a creative focus, then I think you can afford to be a bit more out there, as long as what you're putting forward is genuinely creative and not just gimmicky. I think what you've got to be really wary of is that you don't know who's going to be looking at your application, and I would probably be a little bit more conservative in how I put my application across. So I probably would play it a little bit safe rather than go for something overly creative or gimmicky. And I guess there's also ways of being creative without being gimmicky. I know I've used that word a lot. So yeah, maybe I'm not a good person to ask of this question. I mean, it probably, in all seriousness, it probably would be worth talking to, somebody who does recruitment in a creative sector and ask them, what their expectations would be and if there are any sort of real no-nos there. I'll be honest, I don't have experience in the creative sector in terms of recruitment. So I think that's maybe a sort of slightly specialist area where perhaps, Susanna, you can maybe find some good links on what works and what doesn't. But I would probably not be too gimmicky and creative. Just be yourself as well. That's the other big piece of advice.
Yeah, I think the only things that I'd add are my rule of thumb would be as if it's a creative role, it's fine to use a creative CV. If it's not a creative role, perhaps don't use a creative CV. It sounds really obvious, but those creative roles I completely understand and appreciate will be looking for something a little bit different. And the other thing I'd say is don't lose yourself in the creativity. What that employer really wants to see is you, and don't let yourself be lost in all that's going on. Be proud of who you are and what you've achieved and show them that, as well as all your examples of your creativity. The other thing I was going to mention, I guess that's probably where a creative decision has gone too far, is if it's not a creative role and you've taken the creativity too far. People might find that a little much. I think it's Happy Kittens. There's a vegan sweet brand, and I've got an example, and I'll send it to you on the email afterwards, of someone who's taken the back of their packaging and reworded it all to be their CV. And they got employed from it, and it was hailed a fantastic CV. The hours of work that will have taken is a really big risk. So just be aware that we completely get it. Applying for jobs is hard work, and it takes time. So just be careful with your mental health and your physical health in all the applications you're doing as well. So we've got, before we can get to this embarrassing shortlisting, we've got another question that's come in on Mentimeter. It says, on the interests and achievements part of your CV, what is appropriate to include?
Well, I would probably say what is inappropriate. I mean, don't put anything on there that is in bad taste or illegal. I mean, again, I would probably sort of be a little bit cautious and play it safe in terms of interests and achievements. I mean, in terms of interests, it's not that's not usually part of the shortlisting criteria. I mean, again, that's quite a sort of old style of recruitment, getting people to list their interests. So I'm not sure how relevant currently it is to put interests. I mean, certainly when I'm doing recruitment and shortlisting now, I don't really look at people's interests, and it certainly isn't part of the shortlisting criteria. So I wouldn't spend too much time on that. Achievements is quite different. I think achievements, it's important to put something that you're really proud of. And we all have got achievements, however small they might appear to be. Definitely put those down, but yeah, just steer clear of anything that's in bad taste or a bit dodgy, or definitely nothing illegal.
Nothing you wouldn't want on your mum's fridge.
Yeah, good advice.
I think for me, it's all about, don't add it unless it adds value. Is it an opportunity to demonstrate some transferable skills? If so, brilliant, add it on. I've had a CV before where their interests were gin and Netflix. That got removed before the application went through. They were actually a very good candidate, but it just wasn't appropriate. It didn't add anything apart from, they're trying to break the ice, but that just came across as being unfair. So, only have something on there if there's something that you've sort of specifically achieved that you're proud of, that, I don't know, you hiked up a mountain or did the 3 Peaks challenge or something like that and raise money for charity. Again, that's things that you can kind of thread in within that interest, and it demonstrates, oh, okay, that person must be determined, they must be this, they must be that. So that could be really helpful. I mean, I've just been thinking as well about the shortlisting process and where that begins. And one thing that we haven't actually touched on is social media. So one thing that I was going to say is, before putting an application in, if you are in a position that who's going to shortlist that application, perhaps you could start following that person on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn, start to comment on the sort of things that, any posts that they're making, or send a connection request. Because again, then when your name comes through, you've kind of warmed up that application, and so immediately they might think, oh yeah, I know that person. But things not to do, again, a lot of businesses do have a little look on Facebook or Instagram, whatever it might be, and you might think, oh, they won't be able to find me, or that isn't sort of necessarily a professional forum, so they won't be looking at it. They definitely do. This isn't in there for my embarrassing, but once we had a candidate that was a student at a different institution, a college actually, and his Facebook picture was him smoking something from a bong. Whether that was a legal or illegal substance, I don't know. But again, they didn't get further than that. That was it, and they were basically blacklisted because nobody would take them seriously with that. With that being how they want to present themselves to the world. So yeah, going back to the question, it's all about things that can demonstrate transferable skills and show achievements, but just really think about how it is that you're portraying yourself, even in areas that you wouldn't directly link to that application and getting shortlisted.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, it is a really important point. And actually, your very first question, Susanna, starting it off, when does the shortlisting process start? Your social media presence, can backfire. So it's probably worth, Googling yourself and then maybe doing some sort of cleansing operation if necessary, to remove some of the stuff that you wouldn't want an employer to read about you. I mean, I have been asked, and I think this is increasingly common, possibly for more senior roles, but it might spill over into graduate recruitment as well. But at the interview stage, people are asking nowadays, is there anything about you that we should be aware of? And employers are asking that because you can guarantee that somebody probably in their HR department will be Googling you as part of the recruitment process. So yeah, just right now start thinking about how you appear online, positively and negatively. And I think what Toby said about LinkedIn, I use LinkedIn a huge amount for all sorts of things. So I think the more you can establish a really credible presence on LinkedIn, even if at the moment it's just that, you're a graduate or you're a student at Christchurch, but the more you can start using it, and as Toby said, commenting on those things, then that starts to establish you as, a professional person in your own right. So yeah, definitely LinkedIn.
I'm going to use my famous example again and say the same goes with CVs as it does with your social media. If you don't want to see it on your mum's fridge, or she won't want to see it on her fridge, don't have it up there. It's not worth it. And the other tidbit of advice that I just caught off Mark Gaisford, who is one of our local employers, he had on his LinkedIn, which was the idea that rather than immediately linking with someone on LinkedIn who perhaps doesn't know you, or if you haven't got a message ready to send, is to click follow, and then you get updates of statuses that they're putting up and things that they're posting, and you can begin commenting that way and warming them up and building a relationship before you then go in with connecting and sending them a message about something specific. And make sure that when you're sending that message, when you're trying to connect, you're also sending that message, and you're making it a good one and you've well thought it through.
Yeah, and please, can I make a personal plea? If I love it when students send me a connect request on LinkedIn, but I much prefer it if they send a personalised message, even if it's just to say, oh, I'd really value being a connection, just something to make it more personal than just a bald friend request. Connection request would be much better received. And I know there's been a lot of talk on LinkedIn about that. Some people just will refuse on principle to accept a request if there's no personal message that goes with it.
That's great, thank you. I'm conscious that we've got less than 10 minutes remaining, and it is very important we get to these embarrassing shortlisting experiences. So we're going to go straight there next. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to keep sending them through and we'll get to those as well. What is the most embarrassing thing you have either seen or done, and we're not going to ask you whether it's seen or done, on an application?
So I'm going to tell you that this was seen and definitely not done by myself.
Okay.
I think the most ridiculous thing that I've seen was on a cover letter, where somebody said, I'm looking for a new job because I don't like my current one and my boss is a bit of an idiot. Obviously, I'm sure we can all pick that apart and identify a few things which are bad about that statement. Again, I'm pleased to say that wasn't one of our students or graduates, and that was a number of years ago. And I can only assume that the person wasn't very serious about the job that they were applying to. But everything is wrong with that statement. So I think that's the worst thing that I've seen.
Okay, so the worst thing I've seen, and this really was unforgivable on so many levels, was that I had an application from somebody who in the references section had put the name of somebody as their referee, and that person had died about 18 months previously. And so that just was a terrible thing for that person to have done. And it just makes me want to emphasize the importance of taking care over your application. It just looked as if they'd wheeled out an old CV, not updated it, and plus it was just a really poor thing to do. So yeah, I mean, that was just excruciating. So yeah, make sure we haven't really talked about references and referees as part of the shortlisting process, but references are quite important and they can say a lot about you, your choice of referee, who you've included, and sometimes more importantly, who you haven't included. So a big tip from me would be, whatever job you're doing, always do it to the best of your ability, because you might need that person to be your referee and to give you a reference. So yeah, referees are probably more important than you might think.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, thank you for that point, Sophie. I remembered you wanted to say something about the references, and that's great. Just to follow up on that, you don't need to include a references section on your CV unless your industry specifically goes for that. That's, again, quite an old-fashioned thing. You don't need to include names and numbers on your CV. You can leave all of that. Applications might well ask for it, in which case you'll need to do that and do it well. The other thing I would always suggest, as a matter of politeness, is to ask your referees before you pop them down, even if you're using them fairly regularly. If you are, you might like to say, I'm doing about 10 applications at the moment, can I put you down for the duration? Or you might like to ask them each time you're doing it if they're a number of years apart, but always ask them first. I've had it before where I've had a reference request come through and I wasn't aware it was coming, and it just kind of throws you a bit, and it doesn't put you in the best position for starting to write really positive and enthusiastic things about the person. So number one, you don't have to write the references on the CV, and number two, always ask first.
And I would also say, try and make the references relevant to the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a job in I don't know, in a university, for example, if you can put a referee down who has got some connection with the university, that will carry more weight than some random individual. So yeah, try and make your references relevant. I know it's hard to do that all the time, but if you do have the opportunity to tailor your referees, then that can make the difference.
And if you don't yet have employment referees, I'd encourage you to get some if you can, do some work experience. And if you need support with that, then do get in touch with us. But also, if you've got volunteering experience, perhaps your volunteering manager or line manager through that would be able to be a referee for you. So that's a really good additional avenue to look at. What do you most enjoy about shortlisting? So we've done the good, we've done the bad, we've done the embarrassing. Why do you do it? Why do you love doing it?
Oh, well, because you never know what little gem is going to turn up amongst that pile of applications. And it's the same with interviewing. So I think with shortlisting, sometimes it can be a bit soul destroying if you get a lot of poor quality applications, but you just don't know what you're going to uncover. And, you know, I know from experience that, you know, mostly as part of the recruitment process, you'll get some really great candidates. And so, you know, it's your job to uncover them, and it's their job to make sure you uncover them.
I think Sophie's answered that perfectly. I think, you know, it's a very satisfying process when you're able to find somebody that's going to be a great fit for a job. Obviously, I've recruited lots of jobs for lots of other people in terms of my recruitment experience in the past. But for me, especially when I recruit somebody to join my team as well, sort of finding that diamond in the rough and getting somebody that you know is going to be a fantastic fit and that you're going to get to work with moving forward is really, really fantastic. And yeah, it only takes one. And I think that's the important thing. I remember it was a few years ago now. I was on an interview panel. I think Sophie might have joined me actually on that one. And we had 6 interviews for the day. And at the end of the 5th interview, I had my head in my hands and I said, right, how can we change the advert to make sure that when we advertise it again, we get some better suited candidates for the job? And then I was very fortunate because the 6th applicant, the 6th interview of the day, was absolutely fantastic, and we were delighted to you know, offer that person the job and get them to join the team. So yeah, it's just, you know, it's great when it all works out and you identify some sort of real talent.
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, I know that day that you're talking about, Toby. So yeah, can relate to that 100%. I mean, one other thing I wanted to say was that when you're applying for a job, try and flip your approach. So rather than making it about, I want to get shortlisted, think, I'm going to make it impossible for them not to shortlist me, because I'm going to answer that exam question. I'm going to present myself in the best possible light so that they're not going to be able to reject me at that first hurdle.
That's fantastic. We have one more question. I'm aware that it's 2 minutes to 2. So if anyone needs to drop out as we go, feel free to drop out as we go. I'll keep the recording going because I think this is all fantastic and really helpful information, and you're welcome to keep asking questions. We'll hope that Sophie and Toby don't have anywhere to be immediately after this, and so we can run over by a minute or 2. Is that okay with you both?
Yeah, that's fine.
The next question, I'm just going to give a little bit of input for once I've asked it before I hand over to you to answer it. I'm not going to answer it, but I'm just going to give some information. So the question is, how bad does empty space at the bottom of a page on a CV actually look to a recruiter? And the information I just wanted to give that question answer is 2 things. The first is that a standard graduate CV should be no longer than 2 sides. Therefore, if yours is 2.5, then do work with us. Do send your email over your CV to us, and we can help you with that. And the other thing is, yeah, so they're the 2 things. Sorry. First of all, it shouldn't be more than 2 sides. If it's more than that, then obviously it's easier to bring it down than pull it out, but we can do both. And the second thing is, if you're struggling with your CV in any way, feel free to get in touch with us, and that's what we're here to do, is here to help. So I'll ask you the question again, just so it's fresh in your mind, Sophie and Toby. How bad does empty space look at the bottom of a page on a CV to a recruiter?
I'll go first. I think it's hard to answer that question without the context, really. I think if it's meant to be 2 pages and you've gone over by a little bit, then I would probably try and edit it to fit it on 2 pages. I think, you know, in some ways space per se isn't really an issue, but it's got to be seen in the context of the overall application. So if it looks like you just genuinely haven't written enough, then that probably won't be looked on favourably. But in itself, I don't think space is an issue.
And from my opinion, I think I'd mostly agree. I think, as Sophie mentioned about, you can format the CV, you can change, the margins and stuff like that. So where possible, you want it to be those 2 pages. Again, as Susanna said, if it's sort of 2.5, then I'd probably work to sort of snip it down to 2 pages. And again, you can probably do that by just playing around with font size and margins and stuff like that. But at the same time, you don't want that page to be too packed. You don't want it just to be blocks of information that are challenging to read as well. So, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a few sort of blank spaces, but actually I would question whether they need to be there, because you can probably play around with the document in such a way that there won't be any.
That's great. Thank you both very, very much. At present, we have no more questions coming in, and therefore I think that's a really good place to round up. Do you have any last minute one-line encouragements for our students and recent graduates?
Keep it brief, keep it relevant, and no spelling mistakes.
I would agree with that. One thing that we haven't touched upon actually, and that I'll just say now, is that make sure within your cover letter, within your CV as well, if you want to be shortlisted, don't include useless information. 98% of job roles shouldn't have a photo there. They shouldn't ever have your national insurance number. They shouldn't have your date of birth. Basically, don't put any information on your CV that would enable somebody to discriminate against you, is the kind of idea, because all of that sort of stuff is personal data. They don't need it. And actually, I've known businesses that will discard those CVs because they don't want to process that personal data, because through processing personal data, they then have data retention responsibilities and stuff like that. So not as brief as Susanna probably hoped, but I just say, like Sophie did, keep it concise. And only have stuff in there which needs to be there and it's really going to add value. But just make sure that you answer that job spec.
Great. Well, we will leave it there and I will stop the recording, and I am very grateful for your time.